refuse to fight back. Trap me in a fantasy that leaves me stranded. Sell me your dystopia that you've rebranded.
Hi, something a bit different this week. This idea has been bouncing around in my head for ages, so I figured I would get it out of my system and take this opportunity to walk you through it because I am not a guitarist. And normally I am an electronic music producer, but I've got a really soft spot in my heart for metal and metalcore, and every now and again like to try to take a stab at it. This time, actually playing guitar myself. So it's a guitar I bought from a friend of mine. It's a Schecter guitar that I have tuned to drop C with some heavy gauge strings, and I'm running it through an amp sim, which is the Nolly Archetype plugin. So just for context, I'm running two computers, my kind of recording computer and then my gaming laptop, which I actually use for most of my kind of day-to-day production. This is everything on my recording computer where I just tracked guitars. So here is the Archetype plugin. These are my settings. It's a lightly modified default preset for the most part, and then I'm running a few different presets for lead parts and that kind of thing. And I have, as is kind of tradition, double tracked a bunch of the guitar parts, so recorded the same part twice and then hard panned them left and right. And I rendered all this out and then brought it into my DAW on my Windows computer. Regardless, I do want to draw your attention to the fact that, like I said, I'm not a guitarist, and so I've made quite a few edits, and this is on the raw guitar before it hits the amp, so it's pretty imperceptible, but I've just cleaned up timing, mashed together different takes to get something that works, basically hacked it together as best I could, and I think I've come up with something that sounds pretty polished in the end. Regardless, here's what just a single track of raw guitar sounds like. It's clipping a little bit. I think that was with the render, but regardless, nothing super spectacular. We run it through the Nolly amp sim, and then we've double tracked it, panned it hard left and right, and you get... And you're probably hearing all sorts of like imprecision in where I'm hitting frets, where I'm hitting strings, all that kind of stuff. But hopefully in the context of the mix, it works. Especially in a big layered section like this one, where I've layered quite a bit. So let's just go through this, starting with the rhythm guitar. So similar amp settings. And then the built-in reverb built into the Archetype plugin. Layered with that is a synth doubling that same part. In Analog Lab. This is hard lead. And then I've got a separate version just drenched in reverb that plays that last note so it rings out. Also layered with that is another instance of Analog Lab, and this gets us into bass territory. I actually did try programming an electric bass, and it just didn't quite fit. I just couldn't quite get it to work right. So instead, we're going all synth bass all the time in this case. Kind of the Mick Gordon approach, where he'll often layer very buzzy saw basses with guitars and kind of blend the two together, and that's a big part of his sound. And so I've basically just ripped that off wholesale. So let's do the Analog Lab and Serum together. Layered with the guitar. And you'll notice that I've pitched the guitars down just 12 cents to get them to fit a little bit more with the synth parts. And then I've done a bit of EQ. I kind of stacked it because I was like, well, this one's not enough, so let's just add to it to kind of sculpt the guitars. So let me just play those without the EQ real quick, and then we'll get back to the synth bass. We don't need all that extra low end, it's just making the track muddy, and all that low end is being handled by the synth basses, so I elected to cut it and get rid of some both harsh and boxy frequencies. Regardless, let's get back to the synth basses. Synthwave split, and it's got this little arpeggio thing going on already, and that's also the bass part you hear in the intro, and then layered with that is just a basic ass serum patch. subtle amount of distortion on it, and it's just 2 octaves of saw waves with unison up a bit, so 2 super saws just chugging along to follow the guitar part. So here's all of what we've got so far together. And finally, drums. Now, this is a Kontakt instrument, the Matt Halpern signature pack from Periphery 4. Periphery, one of my favorite metal bands of all time, and they recorded the drums into a virtual instrument from the sessions from their latest album as of this recording. And they sound freaking fantastic. So let me get rid of the processing. So this is what they sound like raw. And this is a somewhat tweaked kit. I've swapped some snares and kicks out and then tuned stuff a little bit. I've got the turbo knob turned up a bit, well, all the way, on multiple parts. I've turned down the cymbals a bit so they don't stick out too much, and then I've done even more processing from there. This is iHeart NY by Baby Audio. It's a compressor that really gives a lot of snap to a sound. It like clamps down on the transients in such a way that lets them poke through, but kind of flattens out the sound in a way that I find really pleasing. It adds this pumping that some might say sounds like overcompression. To me, it sounds like production, if that makes sense. And I basically turned up this spank knob and then added that as a parallel signal. And because that wasn't enough, we've added a little bit of OTT and then a limiter to get a bit more volume without clipping. Just catching some peaks. So by themselves, it sounds like I've overcompressed them, but I think in the context of the mix, they're very in your face. They stick out nicely while still melding well with everything, which is what I really wanted. In context, I think it really works. Once again, I'm a producer, although I should mention I do have over a decade and a half of drums experience. And so that's why they're programmed, and I think pretty realistically, this is exactly what I would actually play. So let's talk about the vocals next, and we'll get back to the rest of the guitars. So these are recorded from an artist I found on Fiverr, as are pretty much all the vocals I use these days. Wrote the song myself, sent them an exact vocal demo of exactly what I wanted, and then do some mixing after the fact to get everything to mesh nicely. So there was already some processing on the vocals that I got. I also have raw versions, but I ended up using the processed versions most of the time because they already sounded really good. So here's what I got. Your bottom line's worth more than life. So we don't need all that low end. Once again, we want this to sit on top of the mix. Your bottom line's worth more than life. A little bit of OTT. Your bottom line's worth more than lives. You sympathize with fascists. You always fear those who... A little bit of riffs, just some subtle distortion to really bring it out. And then an infiltrator preset that also adds a bit of distortion and a little bit of width. Your bottom line's worth more than lives. You sympathize with fascists. It's actually a little more aggressive by itself, once again, but in the context of the mix, just helps it really stick out and add a little bit of extra grit that I think works really nicely. And then to punctuate certain lines, I've layered in 2 duplicates just on certain phrases. You sympathize with fascists. You always try to push us backwards. Now, by themselves, these sound extremely cursed. Do vocalists get mad when producers mess with their vocals like this? I hope not. Regardless, what I have done, the heinous crimes I have committed here, are basically I pitched it down, brought the formant up a bit, and then used Dimension Expander to widen it out. And then did kind of the opposite in terms of pitch. I've pitched it up 12 semitones and then brought the formant down. So this one sounds especially cursed. It sounds like asphyxiation. And once again, cranked Dimension Expander. And layered together, you can't really hear the cursedness. You sympathize with fascists. And it punctuates certain lines really nicely, adds a bit of extra flavor and polish. You sympathize with fascists. It gets lost in the mix a bit, but that's intentional because I don't want it to draw too much attention to itself. Moving on to the chorus, though, let's talk through those vocals and then move back to the guitars.
Sell me everything I want with strings attached.
And see, I've done like a little bit of timing adjustments, just here and there, for one thing, to get the double tracked vocals to fit together a little bit better, and then also just to kind of line it up with the grid in terms of the way I heard the groove. I should also mention, for vocal demo purposes, I did like a little whisper scream demo myself. No, you cannot hear it. It is cursed and embarrassing. And then I used the plugin M-Voice, which is a vocal plugin that basically sings for you, to demo the exact sung vocal part that I want, which I found to be super effective for working with vocalists. That way, there's no ambiguity. You just hand them this and say, sing this, and then if they take liberties with it, I try to just roll with it, because that usually makes for a better part that fits their vocal style better. But I think it's nice to give them something that's like extra clear as to what you want. So this is what it sounds like.
Sell me everything I want with strings attached.
So it sounds very artificial, obviously.
My brain
but it's enough to get a very clear idea of what I'm after. And then she sang it.
Sell me everything I want with strings attached.
I've done basically no processing to these processed vocals because, like I said, they already sound really good. So all I've done is cut some lows and then panned them a little bit left and a little bit right. Sometimes I'll hard pan vocals left and right, like 100% left and right. But in this case, that just didn't quite sound right. And so I settled for just a little subtle amount of panning to add some width, but still keep them fairly cohesive. So I promised you more guitars. In addition to the very basic power chord part, we have a couple of little lead layers. So first of all, this double tracked part right here. And then I cut that off because I played something that didn't end up really fitting. And I've got baby audios spaced out on this, as I do everything with reverb in the song. And some lows cut, some highs boosted. And then layered with that is an even higher part that I believe is just a single guitar part. And have some processing on that as well. Crystallizer. It's this like octave up granular delay. And then spaced out on top of that. Cut that mud. So let's start layering that stuff. It all melds together to create, I think, one fairly cohesive wall of guitars with relatively few layers. Bring in our basses. And that's how I built up the chorus. It's fairly simple. This is basically a glorified pop song, and that's exactly what I wanted. And I should also mention this lead part that plays after the chorus ends. Very similar to the other stuff that we've already looked at. It's a little messy by itself. And then I've also got this layer that you can't really hear. I've pitched it a full octave up and then just reverbed it into oblivion. Now, final thing before this breakdown, let's talk about the lead into it. We're looking for the effect. So this lead in to the breakdown started off as the bend, which already has some effects on it. So this is the bend that introduces the breakdown, which is just kind of aimlessly bending a string upwards and going from there. So we've got a few instances of Infiltrator. Hyping it up quite a bit already. And then I have duplicated that track and I just started throwing different effects on it. So here's raw again. Here's crystallizer. And that's sending it an octave down. Spaced out next. Rifts. Just distort it to hell and back. And then Infiltrator to really glitch it out. So I rendered that out, reversed it, and then added a whole host of even more effects. So here's what it sounds like reversed. you can hear all that distortion coming in really nicely, and then those delays are all coming together, like coalescing into a sound, which is exactly what I wanted. I wanted something to start like all broken up and then slowly coalesce. So then we start stacking, and actually didn't affect it that much. Not as much as I thought anyway. So first of all, an infiltrator with the mix knob being brought up over time, which is a lot. And then I've cut the volume off with a dedicated volume plugin. And then finally just some EQ to cut some lows. It ends up sounding like a pretty complex sound, and it's something I was able to make completely from scratch. Of course, I used presets to do so, but you get the idea. The other fun thing about this breakdown is I actually stole it from somewhere, but somewhere that I'm very well within my rights to steal it from. Because a while back, I did a video where I used my own music as the source material for an AI to generate more music. So I fed it a bunch of my own songs in different styles, and it generated more music out of that. And I fed it a previous metal song that I made, and it gave me this riff that I'll play for you right now. So because that's something that AI generated from something that I made for my own intellectual property, I'm pretty comfortable just yoinking that and recreating it for reals, which is exactly what I did for this breakdown. And I might have to try feeding this into an AI and seeing if I can get it to generate even more stuff. Basically like an infinite song ideas glitch. I might do that for a future video, maybe on my second channel. But for now, that is basically it in terms of the making of this song. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you'd like to stream it, the links will be below, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching.